Hey guys, I've now finished Elden Ring 3 times on 2 separate characters, so I feel pretty exhausted, and I feel like I have a pretty good idea of which bosses I like and which I don't. However, I'm not gonna rank every single boss in the game, because frankly they made that job impossible. There's too many reused bosses and slightly altered versions of others, as well as regular enemies being disguised as bosses. So I'm gonna stick to major bosses like Godrick, Morgott and Rennala, and like usual, bosses are in the following tiers: awful, bad, mediocre, decent, good, great and amazing. Except this time there's no boss I would consider awful, and actually there's no bad tier boss either. So we're starting all the way from mediocre, which is pretty impressive. Let's begin. Okay, if I did count all the other ganks in this game, trust me, we'd have a boatload of awful tier bosses. Bosses like triple crystallions, duo gargoyles, double watchdogs, or just dogshit fights. But the only major boss fight that's a gank in this game is the Godskin Duo, which is understandably hated by a lot of people. I, on the other hand, hate to admit that I kind of enjoy it, and some of it is definitely because of how good the music is. Still, I agree that the design is pretty bad. There are pillars for crowd control, which is nice, but that doesn't change how badly these two work together. Usually FromSoft would make the classic one is slow and the other one is fast. It worked with Ornstein and Smo, and it worked with Sister Frieda. But here, both of the bosses are just as fast and aggressive. Even the one that looks like he just ate Covetous Demon for breakfast. Usually I die from getting fucked over by overlapping combos that you can't realistically avoid. I do like that both Godskins have their own separate second phase, and that once you've killed one of them, the other is vulnerable while trying to resummon a replacement. So there's some strategy to the fight at least. But the most enjoyable part of this fight for me is the Godskin Apostle, the skinny one. I really enjoyed fighting him solo when I first found him in the Caelid Tower, especially when his body begins stretching to unnatural lengths. So even if the fatty's there as a disruptance, I can't help but find some excitement from battling Godskin Apostle again. You guys know me, I'm a big Bloodborne fan, but I'm also a big good boss fan, and this is not a good boss, so I'm not a big fan of it. It is, however, a very eerie monster design. It's straight up a great one you'd see in that one game that I'm fond of. It even has an eye inside its head.
Plant eyes on our brains.
And the music just adds such an unsettling feeling to the encounter. However, I'm more unsettled by how boring the fight is mechanically. Mostly he just does AoEs that force you away from him, and when you finally get the chance to land hits on him, he'll teleport away. And the hitbox on his grab is Iron Golem levels of why. I know lore-wise he's using gravity powers, but does that really have to include being teleported into his arms? I feel like he's also gimped by the fact that you see smaller versions of him elsewhere in the game. If this was the one and only of his kind to exist, finding him would be such a memorable and creepy moment. As it is, it's okay. Fire Giant is a very typical Souls Giant. You just tickle his feet without being able to see what the big boy's doing because 90% of his body is off camera. It's pretty boring for the first half. However, the creativity of Elden Ring really kicks in at part 2, where his chest wakes up and shoots fire like a fucking cannon. It's a very easy boss once you figure out where he's vulnerable and when, but I found it fun how first playthrough I was hacking away at him for over 5 minutes before he finally died. And on my third, I killed him in just 2 minutes. And it's probably one of the only bosses that actually works on horseback. Most of the time I'd rather fight on foot so I can actually iframe through the attacks, but this guy is slow enough that you can outspace pretty much everything. So on the whole, I don't really enjoy the gameplay in the moment a whole lot, but it's a cool moment to look back on. I was really surprised to get a remembrance from this boss because it didn't really feel any different from most mini-bosses in the game, especially because you fight a weaker version of it in the same area. It's a standard beast-type boss where it can charge at you, headbutt you, and kick you if you get behind it. His few unique moves are the ones where he jumps around in the air spewing spirit juice and his annoying habit of teleporting away. But what we all like about this boss is the ambience, obviously. It's weirdly relaxing in a game full of horrible monstrosities. The music is very serene and different, and there's nothing stressful about the boss. It's an okay fight and not much more than that, but I enjoy it. Everyone either loves this boss to bits or they fucking despise it, and I absolutely understand both perspectives. On one hand, they finally managed to top Orphan of Kos in difficulty. Malenia is without any question the hardest and most brutal boss they've ever created, and she would rank very highly in my hardest bosses of all time list. She might even take the throne. But on the other hand, her ability to lifesteal can lead to many frustrating moments, especially coupled with her flurry attack. This attack is her biggest flaw in my book. I can dodge it consistently if I'm at a distance, but up close it's pretty much impossible to avoid the first hit, which alone can nearly one-shot me. And again, her healing from that just makes it all the more frustrating. Along with that, I would say another big issue is just the sheer amount of health she has. Phase 2 I'm fine with her health, but Phase 1 just drags. But as much of a hard time I've had with this boss, I just can't put it below the good tier. She has an incredibly well-designed moveset, aside from the flurry. It's both challenging and fair, and engaging enough to stay exciting when the fight drags. And her visual design looks like a painting come to life. It's slightly gross, but at the same time beautiful. So I would say cut her Phase 1 health in half, give the flurry maybe a longer wind-up or change it enough so you can avoid it at close range, and there you go. Do that and she'd be a high-ranking boss for me. Rennala is both a neat gimmick boss and an even neater spectacle boss. It might in practicality not be much more than a less messy and an even easier Deacons of the Deep, but I thought it was cool the first time. It's kind of haunting with a crawling sorcerer singing a children's lullaby while dropping chandeliers and shit on you. Not something I'll be forgetting in an instant. Here the target is obvious, it's the one with the yellow bubble, but I like how you can locate her by just listening since she's the one singing. Then for the second half of the fight we get a more traditional sorcerer boss, and usually I hate sorcerers in these games. For example, Miriam, she can go die in a fucking fire. Fuck you. Fuck everything about you. Go die in a ditch. But Rennala is just cool. It's easy, but how can I not enjoy it when it all looks this good? Like, she can turn into a fucking moon. It has the same kind of relaxing serenity that Ancestor Spirit has, except this time the fight doesn't bore me. When she starts summoning help, it kinda feels like another attempt at Elana, the Squalid Queen. I'm probably one of the only ones that like that boss in Dark Souls 2, and I think Rennala works about as well, minus all the anxiety. Where do I even begin with this boss? It's fucking insane. It's Yorm, but better. You're once again given a Storm Ruler type weapon, but this time you can do much more with it than just very slow charge-up attacks. It gives you extra range too, which is absolutely a requirement for this boss. The God-devouring serpent face sets the stage well, even if the fight itself is pretty bland. But the visuals and the music alone carry it. Then we get one of the most fucked up mid-boss cutscenes I've ever seen.
Very well.
I mean, what the fuck? And it gets even worse when it just pulls out a writhing, nasty sword out of the snake's throat. Then the music for Phase 2 kicks in, and the boss will soon enough begin summoning raining skulls on you, and I just feel like I'm in the depths of hell. Most Souls bosses feel tragic in one way or another, but this boss just feels like Satan. I don't even care that the fight is mediocre. I mean, I care enough to not put it in the great tier or higher, but still. He's got super delayed sword slashes that I always have trouble with. I don't really like it when bosses take 10 seconds to swing their sword after starting the animation. It just fucks with my brain. And I seriously don't know how to dodge this super slam attack. I never have, and I don't know if I ever will. But for a spectacle boss, it can't really get much better than this. I think this is on par, if not better, than Divine Dragon from Sekiro. I know lots of people are praising this flying worm as the best dragon boss in the series, but I haven't really felt the same in my experiences so far. It's a thrilling boss to take on, for sure, I like it. The lightning that attaches to you if you get too close is also kind of a clever and fair way to keep you from just hiding underneath the boss the whole fight. But if you stay in front of him, you're perhaps in even more danger. Sometimes he can be pretty chill and give you easy to punish attacks, and other times he spams his swipe attacks that leave a delayed lightning shock. It can get chaotic very fast. Even more so if he combos that with the curse mists or whatever these are. Probably the coolest attacks he has are the ones where he summons giant bolts of lightning that resemble swords and then slams them down on the ground. After fighting so many tedious dragons that all shared the same dull moveset, this one was a pleasant surprise for sure, even if it is a reskin as well. As a side note, I and many others never got to hear the second phase theme. It's gotta be a bug, and I hope they fix it because it's definitely worth hearing. Morgott felt me more than any other first boss ever has in any of these games. It was embarrassing. He's such a roll catcher with his varied delays, what a dick. Some of his hits come really fast and others he winds up for days. And you also have to try and remember which of them he can follow up with instant dagger strikes. I would otherwise say he's too hard for a first boss, but you could see it as a clever way of telling the player to go explore other areas first and then come back once you're better equipped. The only downside of that is that if you do that, Stormveil Castle and Godrick will be a lot easier, but regardless of his position in the game and what he's supposed to teach the player, it is a great boss. I found his ability to conjure up secondary weapons a really cool concept, and it felt great to get better at the fight. I'm sure that if they sped him up and gave him more cool factor and combo variety, he could be top tier. I at first wanted to separate Radagon and Elden Beast and rank them separately, since they're very different bosses, but in the end I figured that thematically Radagon on his own wouldn't have the proper impact of a final boss, so it just felt weird to rank him by himself. He is the true final boss for me though. It's an incredibly fun fight with a sick theme. It being a remix of the main theme of the game just gives it a great sense of finality. His fight focuses a lot on these cool looking AoEs that his hammer creates whenever it slams to the ground. They don't change how you need to time your attacks really, they just ensure that the boss has an easier time hitting you, which I don't mind, at least it gives him some needed flashiness. Before the second form he has his own second phase where his aggression gets off the charts with constant teleporting, jumping around while throwing lightning bolts. It's great fun, even if the next stage does bring down the overall enjoyment down by a bit. Elden Beast is a god and he absolutely looks the part. Visually and thematically, it's all there. However, when it comes to gameplay, half the fight I'm trying to figure out what the fuck is going on the screen, and the other half I'm chasing after the damn thing. He's kind of a mixture of a dragon boss and that bloodborne boss Astel, only neither of those two have anything as headache-inducing as this yellow piece of shit that follows you around for half a minute. And during that time the boss is free to do any other attack, and that can combo in a very unfortunate way. You're definitely going to die a couple times at least before you can figure out all the mechanics, and because there's no checkpoint after killing Radagon, it can feel like you're wasting your time. I like one thing equally as much in both phases though, and that's how they can both attack you with the actual Elden Ring symbol. First Radagon hammers it into the ground, creating a massive AoE, and then Elden Beast conjures it around you in the water and you have to escape it by jumping over the rings. It's a very cool mechanic. It's a great final boss, but let's be real, Radagon carries it. From here on out, it was really hard to place the bosses in order. I thought Godrick would be easy top 5 when I first played the game, since he was such a cool boss. Great character model, great music, great mid-fight cutscene where he goes, "Ah, truest of dragons, you were by my side all along." Seriously, I didn't expect that. From gameplay previews, I knew he'd use the dragon's head as an arm, but I didn't think he'd go about it this way. And then he uses the damn thing as a flamethrower in phase 2, which I love. I feel he does suffer a bit from a disease called early game Iadis. I bet if he was a late game fight he'd have way more combos and be a lot faster. Instead he takes forever to land his hits, kinda like Morgott. So it does get less exciting and far easier when you know how it works, but in a way that just makes him all the more well designed for a beginner boss. Dragonlord Placidusax is the coolest boss in the entire game. It has the best presentation out of all the fights, aside from maybe one boss that we'll get to soon enough. I'm not just talking about the opening cutscene, which is great, and I'm not just talking about the arena, which is also one of their best yet. And I'm also not just talking about the visuals or the music, but just everything. After you've damaged the boss for a bit, he'll fly and disappear, and then reappear from a stormy cloud before flying straight at you. And then he'll do some more disappearing and reappearing because why not, it's cool. And once you've damaged him even further, he'll once again fly at you from a cloud before unleashing his ultimate move, the double meteor laser. I did not expect them to pull that on us again, but I welcome it. And the dynamic way they've done the music in this is something they've never done this well before. It goes completely quiet whenever the boss is about to drop the fucking nuclear bomb on you. As for the rest of the boss's moveset, I'd say it's good. It's not really jaw-droppingly amazing, but it does the job for me. He's a tanky fuck too, but I don't really mind it because it's engaging all the way through. It's the best dragon boss in the game, fight me. Margott's edgy brother really surprised me with how good it was. I fought his shittier version in the sewer and wasn't really impressed. That's because that boss is only phase 1 of the real Lord of Blood, and when he shows his true power in the real fight, Holy fuck! He lives up to his name and spreads flaming blood all over the place, and it can get overwhelming fast if you don't stick close to him. He's one of the few late game bosses to have pretty much exclusively slow attacks, but you know by now that those are my weakness. So I found him very challenging, but never really bullshit. He doesn't have that many crazy attacks and combos, but he makes the best use out of the ones he has. Music is once again top notch. I really think they've outdone themselves again when it comes to the soundtrack. My only complaint about the boss would be the arena. I feel it's a bit too tight for this kind of boss where he flies around a lot and has attacks that limit your space. And he can get stuck in the environment and fucking die. I know he's an emo, but come on! The top 4 bosses in this game are just something else. Maliketh in particular fucked me in the ass, Doki style. This boss feels almost like a puzzle boss because I couldn't for the life of me figure out when I'm safe to attack him. But once it clicked, it was extremely satisfying. Phase 1 I don't love a whole lot. It's a decent introduction, but I'd rather it was shorter in favor of the rest of the fights. It does contrast what is to come nicely, and it's not really the first time they've done it like this, where at first the boss fights like a feral beast and then reveals himself to be a true knight in the second form. I love the second form to bits, though I think the balance could be a bit more favorable to the player. It's like they couldn't decide if they should make the boss hard by giving him high damage, or by giving him health sap, or by making his hits reduce your max HP, so they just did all 3. I think they should have just stuck with one, but that doesn't really take away from how enjoyable the moveset is. Again, the trick is to find when you're able to hit him safely. Once it all clicks, the fight feels like a smooth dance. Well, unless the pillars screw you over. Sometimes I get stuck trying to avoid his massive flurry attack, and sometimes it's the boss who gets stuck. It doesn't happen too often, so whatever, I guess. And that flurry attack? God damn, does evading it properly feel great. Positioning plays such a big part in this whole thing, and I love that. Even though the boss looks like an edgy furry's OC, the fight is so good, I don't even care. It's not often that we get to fight fabled heroes in their prime, but here's Godfrey, the first fucking Elden Lord, and goddamn is he a badass. No wonder Godrick is a fanboy of him. Not only is he Elden Lord, but he's also AoE Lord. He's got a bunch of stomps that already cover a large area, but then halfway through phase 1 he'll buff himself so they cover even more ground. And he's got one move where he first slams his axe to the ground, then he kicks his axe deeper into the ground, and then he pulls it out with great force. All 3 steps create AoEs that need to be dodged. But it's a really fun fight, even if the many AoEs took some getting used to, and I like that it's one of those bosses that encourage jumping. I feel it should have more presence in more fights. And you've probably noticed there's a big fucking lion hanging on his back. I was expecting the lion to fight you alongside Godfrey, and I'm sure that's what the devs wanted you to think. Also, they could pull the rug from under you and have him brutally murder the lion. Then he loses the armor and the axe and just goes wrestler mode on you. He's Father Gascoigne on crack. Here half his attacks are grabs, and the other half are, well, you guessed it, AoEs, and I think it's an absolute thrill. He's got a mix of super delight grabs, rapid punches, charge hugs, kicks, and he can shatter the earth with his bare hands. It's brutal, feral, and badass. This whole fight feels like it belongs in God of War. The guy even looks like Thor or some legendary Viking. I'm a big fan of this boss, it always gets me pumped up. This boss has the best presentation probably ever in FromSoft's history, even after Dragonlord. You enter the Red Mane Castle to hear this haunting choir, then you find the festival made in Radagon's honor. Then Slave Knight Gale gives you the context for the fight, showing you a cool little cinematic. You can also talk to other NPCs who all hype up how powerful Radagon is said to be. Then you enter the field of battle, which is about as big as Gale's, and you have Radagon himself firing massive arrows at you from a distance, which are actually giant spears stuck in his back. Then you summon your boys, and you charge into battle, and you die. It's straight up a raid boss, and I love that. And I love how Patches will just ditch you as soon as he joins. But because I'm stubborn, I was determined to beat him by myself, which is just as fun. And yes, this giant dude is indeed riding a tiny little horse. It looks stupid, but I think the lore behind it makes it actually kinda sweet. He learned gravity powers just so he could keep his beloved steed and not crush it under his weight. He has a weird way of showing his love in the fight though. And just when you thought this boss couldn't get any cooler, he jumps into space at half health, and then comes crashing down like a meteorite. I mean, holy shit, that's cool. His moveset is really well designed too, especially considering his size. I can always tell what's going on, but he's not too slow or too predictable. His ultimate moves in Phase 2 are some of the most punishing but cool attacks in the game. One involves him throwing meteorites at you before charging and unleashing a massive shockwave that you need to dodge through or jump over. And then he has this crazy tornado looking move that requires absolute perfection on your end to time it right. It's a boss well worth the hype. I remember thinking how much potential there was for Morgott to be an amazing boss. It was already great, but just lacked impact. But then comes the best section of the entire game. You enter Leyndell, a massive awesome city. I don't hesitate in saying that it's gotta be my favorite area FromSoft has ever made. And it all culminates in you finding King Morgott the Gracegiven, who turns out to actually be Morgott. And his fight surpasses all the expectations and wishes I had for the original Morgott fight. He's a hell of a lot faster, has all sorts of crazy combos, and he doubles down on using conjured secondary weapons, which was my favorite aspect of the first fight. He kinda feels like a sped up Slave Knight Gale in some ways. But instead of lightning, in Phase 2 he uses the power of vomit? Cursed diarrhea? Something like that. Some of his attacks will leave a lasting effect into the liquid that will soon erupt, kind of like a slower and less deadly version of Malenia's butterflies. My favorite aspect about this fight is the different tiers of speed he has. His daggers are super quick, his normal sword attacks are moderately fast, and of course, the big ass hammer is very slow. Together they create a varied and fun pace. Morgott might not be as cool as Gale or even earlier bosses on this list like Radagon and Godfrey, but the fight is pure fun. There's been only 2 other bosses that made me feel like I don't wanna beat the boss or even get good at it because it's just too much fun, and I was sad when it was over. One was Slave Knight Gale and the other was Father Owl, and now Morgott can join their ranks. I don't know what it is with old men in FromSoft games, but they sure love making them into great bosses. And that about does it for this ranking. It was a blast playing through this game, and it was fun getting to share my first impressions on the game's bosses. As usual, time has a curious effect on one's opinions, and maybe a year later my list will look fairly different. But let me know if you want more Elden Ring videos, because I would definitely be up for that. Maybe one about the areas or mini-bosses, or just overall thoughts on the game. So thank you for watching, and I hope you can recover from my correct opinions.